I was 19 and going through what you'd call a photography phase. Not the Instagram kind. I mean the kind where you drag yourself to sketchy locations at weird hours because you think rusted metal and peeling wallpaper look aesthetic. Looking back, it was a really stupid hobby for someone who's startled at their own shadow. But I was convinced I'd build this whole portfolio of urban decay shots. There was this old psychiatric hospital about 40 minutes outside my college town that had been closed since the late 80s. Everyone knew about it. The place came up constantly in those most haunted listicles. But I'd never actually met anyone who'd been inside. It sat behind this massive fence with no trespassing signs plastered every 20 feet. But I'd heard from some guy in my dorm that there was a gap in the back where the fence had been cut. I went on a Wednesday afternoon, figured fewer people would be patrolling midweek. I parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked along the tree line until I found the gap he'd mentioned. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, and I remember tearing my jacket on the jagged chain link getting in. The building was massive. 4 stories of crumbling brick with every window either boarded up or shattered. Graffiti covered the lower walls, but nothing recent. Most of it looked at least 10 years old, all faded and weathered. The front entrance was chained shut, but one of the side doors had been pried open and left hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, the smell hit me first. Mildew and rot and something sharper I couldn't place. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that were all hanging open except for a few at the far end. My footsteps echoed no matter how carefully I walked, and every sound felt like it was bouncing off 100 empty rooms. I started taking pictures. Corridors with checkerboard tile half torn up, an old wheelchair rusted in a corner, a room full of overturned filing cabinets. For the first 20 minutes or so, it wasn't that bad. Creepy, sure, but manageable. Daylight was still coming through some of the broken windows, and I kept telling myself I'd be out before it got dark. Then I found the stairwell to the basement. The door was propped open with a cinder block, and when I shined my phone's flashlight down, I could see the stairs went down at least 2 flights. The walls were this sickly green tile, and there was water damage everywhere. Black mold creeping up from the floor. I almost didn't go down. I stood there for maybe 2 full minutes trying to decide if the photos would be worth it. I went down. The basement was worse than I expected. The ceiling was lower, and all the windows were above ground level, so barely any light reached down there. My phone flashlight could only illuminate maybe 10 feet ahead, and the hallways seemed to go on forever. The doors down here were different. Thick metal with small rectangular windows at eye level. I walked past a few, peeking in. Most were empty. One had a mattress with restraints still attached to the frame. I was getting ready to turn back when I heard it. A scraping sound, metal on concrete, coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. I stopped walking and held my breath. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I heard it again. Longer this time, like something heavy being dragged a few inches, then stopping. Every part of me wanted to leave, but I also thought maybe it was just pipes or the building settling. Old places make weird noises. I kept telling myself that as I took a few steps forward, my phone light shaking because my hand wouldn't stay steady. That's when I saw the door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others. Wooden, not metal, and newer looking. And underneath it, there was light. Not bright, but a dim yellowish glow, like a flashlight or a lantern. I should have run right then. Instead, I walked closer. As I got maybe 10 feet from the door, the scraping sound came again, but this time I could hear something else with it. A low voice, not words I could make out, just this low muttering, like someone talking to themselves. I took another step, and the floorboard under me let out this loud, sharp creak. Everything inside that room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The light under the door flickered, and then I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, coming straight toward the door. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted down that hallway, up the stairs, through the main floor, and out the side door. I heard the basement door slam open behind me as I was crossing the entrance hall. But I didn't stop. I kept running until I got back through the fence, back to my car, and I drove home doing 20 over the speed limit the entire way. I never went back. I deleted the photos, and I never told anyone what happened because part of me didn't want to admit how close I came to something really, really bad. Whoever was in that basement knew I was there, and I don't think they would have just asked me to leave. When I was in my early 20s, I spent a summer working for a forestry service out in Montana. It was mostly trail maintenance and wildlife monitoring, decent pay, and I got to spend 3 months basically living in the mountains. My supervisor was this guy named Danny, who'd been doing it for years and knew every square mile of that forest. About halfway through the summer, Danny mentioned this old fire lookout tower that had been abandoned since the 70s. He said it was about 6 miles off the main trail, totally overgrown, and the Forestry Service kept meaning to tear it down, but never got around to it. He said some hikers had reported seeing lights up there at night, but he figured it was just kids camping or maybe someone squatting. I asked if we should check it out, and he said he'd been meaning to, but never had the time. So one morning, we hiked out there. The trail disappeared after the first 2 miles, and we had to navigate by GPS. The terrain got rough, steep, inclines, fallen trees blocking the path, thick undergrowth. By the time we got close, we were both pretty worn out. The tower sat in a clearing at the top of a ridge. It was one of those tall wooden structures with a cabin at the top and a staircase wrapping around the outside. The wood was gray and rotted in places, and the stairs looked like they'd collapse if you breathed on them wrong. The windows were all broken, and someone had spray painted "Stay Out" across the door at the base. Danny said we should at least check the base level to see if anyone was squatting there. We approached slowly, and I could already feel that something was off. The air felt heavier near the tower, and there was this smell, sharp and chemical, like burnt plastic. The door at the base wasn't locked. It swung open when Danny pushed it, and the smell hit us harder. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with a ladder leading up to the cabin above. There were tarps on the ground, empty, propane canisters in the corner, and what looked like the remnants of a makeshift camp stove. Danny nudged one of the tarps with his boot, and we both saw it at the same time. Under the tarp were bags, clear plastic bags, maybe a dozen of them, filled with some kind of white powder. We both stepped back. Danny pulled out his radio, but there was no signal. We were too deep in the mountains. He told me we needed to leave immediately and report it when we got back to the ranger station. We turned to leave, and that's when we heard the footsteps above us. Heavy boots on the wooden floor of the cabin. Then a voice, muffled but angry, calling down through the ladder shaft. "Who's down there?" Danny grabbed my arm and pulled me out the door. We started moving fast back toward the tree line, but before we made it, I glanced back and saw someone climbing down the ladder, fast. A man, tall, wearing camo and a baseball cap. We ran. We didn't follow the trail we came in on because it was too open. Instead, we crashed through the undergrowth, heading downhill as fast as we could without tripping. I could hear the guy behind us. He was yelling now, and I swear I heard at least one other voice with him. We ran for maybe 20 minutes before we stopped to catch our breath behind a fallen log. Danny checked his radio again. Still no signal. He said we needed to keep moving, get back to the main trail, and get help. We didn't hear them following us anymore, but we didn't slow down. We hiked for another 2 hours before we finally got back to the trailhead where we'd parked. Danny called the sheriff's department from his truck, and by the next morning, there were cops and DEA agents swarming the area. They found the tower, found the drugs, but whoever had been up there was long gone. Danny and I had to give statements, and they told us we were lucky we left when we did. Apparently, there'd been reports of a meth lab operating somewhere in that forest for months, and they'd been trying to locate it. I finished out the summer, but I never went back to that part of the forest. And every time I think about it, I remember that voice calling down through the ladder shaft and how close we came to not making it out of there. During a cross-country road trip I took right after graduating college, I didn't have a job lined up yet, so I figured I'd spend a month just driving, camping, and seeing parts of the country I'd never been to. I was somewhere in Nevada, on one of those long, empty highways where you can drive for an hour without seeing another car. I stopped for gas in this tiny town. Maybe 200 people, one gas station, and a diner that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 50s. While I was filling up, the guy working the register came out and started making small talk. He asked where I was headed, and I said I was just exploring. No real destination. He mentioned there was an old mining settlement about 15 miles north. Said it was one of those ghost towns that tourists sometimes visited. He said the road out there was rough, but my car could probably handle it. I thanked him, paid, and decided to check it out. The turnoff was easy to miss. Just a dirt road with a faded, wooden sign that said Silver Ridge, 12 miles. I followed it, and the guy was right. It was rough. Rocks, potholes, and washboard sections that rattled my car so hard I thought something was going to fall off. But after about 20 minutes, I crested a hill and saw the town below. It was bigger than I expected. Maybe 30 buildings spread out along a single main street, all made of weathered wood and corrugated metal. Most of the structures were collapsing, but a few still looked relatively intact. There were no other cars, no signs of recent visitors. Just this eerie, silent ghost town baking in the desert sun. I parked near the entrance and started walking around. The first few buildings I checked out were empty. Just bare rooms with sand drifts piling up in the corners. One had an old rusted bed frame. Another had shelves that must have been a general store at some point. At the far end of the street, There was a larger building with a sign that said, Assay Office. The Psychiatric door was hanging open, so I stepped inside. It was darker in there, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust. There was a front desk, some old mining equipment in the corner, and a doorway leading to a back room. I walked into the back room, and that's when I noticed the trap door. It was built into the floor, wooden, with an iron ring for a handle. I pulled it open, and there was a ladder leading down into darkness. I should have left it alone. I should have closed the trap door, walked back to my car, and driven away. But I didn't. I turned on my phone's flashlight and climbed down. The ladder dropped about 10 feet into a narrow tunnel. The walls were dirt and rock, reinforced with old wooden beams. The air was cooler down there, but stale, like it hadn't circulated in decades. I followed the tunnel for maybe 30 feet before it opened into a small room. There were mining tools scattered on the ground, pickaxes, shovels, a wheelbarrow. But what caught my attention was the cot in the corner. It wasn't old. The blanket on it was relatively clean, and there was a backpack sitting next to it. Someone had been down here recently, maybe still was. I backed out of the room and started moving quickly back toward the ladder. That's when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the tunnel, past the room I'd just been in. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I didn't wait to see who it was. I climbed the ladder faster than I'd gone down, pulled myself out, and ran. I didn't stop until I got back to my car, started the engine, and drove back down that dirt road faster than I should have. I didn't stop in that town again. I kept driving until I hit the next city and stayed in a motel that night. I still don't know who was down in that tunnel or what they were doing there, but I know I got out just in time. Ghost towns aren't always as abandoned as they seem, and some places that look empty are anything but.